Hello guys, welcome to Screencast tonight then. So we're having a look at these social and cultural factors, which we now call contemporary factors because we're in contemporary modern society, and how they influence participation in 21st century Britain. So, the good side is now that, of course, we're in the age that we're living in. So we'll have a look at how these social and cultural factors that we've looked throughout dictate how we participate in sporting activities today. So same things as normal. Obviously, this is going to change, so even less clear divides between the three classes, and virtually no influence the class will have now on whether you're amateur and professional. So we'll have a look at how women have changed, law and order, how it's got more difficult, you might say, and the same with all this. We've also got a tag on at the end here for the 21st century. We have to have a look at a globalization of sport. How did the globalization of sport lead to kind of things like freedom of movement? How's media coverage linked to the globalization of sport? So if we start through them, first point, just again, we're getting through this concept. We're going to leg it. We're going to cap leg it through the ages. So if we go through with 21st century now, so we're looking at the 2000s. So let's have a look. So starting off. Now, I've just put this up because in the exam, there are times when you're just going to get questions that don't actually ask you too much about what's in the specification. It just asks you to do a little bit of kind of common sense answering, I suppose. So you're looking at here now, you've got how contemporary factors shape for the 21st century Britain. If you look here, conclusions which can be drawn about sports participation in the 21st century. They don't really need to know anything about the social and cultural or contemporary factors here. This is just asking you to look at what it says and analyse it. So you've got this bit here to start with. So this wouldn't actually require any learning. It requires application of what you've seen. So it said on here 15.6 minutes, there's a 1.6 more than 2005-6, so that's like a 10-year period. There's that much in there. However, most adults don't play. You've got to justify, you've got to conclude or provide a conclusion about that. 1.9 million play football once a week 2012-13, which is a drop from the figure of almost 2.2 million for 2012. So you've had a drop in football. Then you've got to start to think, can you just summarise that, and can you maybe give a reason why? Finally, England and Wales census 2011 showed percentage of population age 65 and over was the highest seen in any census at 16.4%. Okay, so that what you have to do is draw a kind of conclusion of that, and then maybe give a little bit of your own opinion. So if we look at the answer here, 6 marks for, okay, so although participation increased, majority of people do not participate. Therefore, strategies used by the government, or particularly in this case Sport England, have worked but not good enough. Then basically saying they're not strategies that are put forward by the organisation, which is Sport England, are not sufficiently targeted. So then you've got here, fact, 0.3 people fewer played football in 2012-13. So this would mean that strategies to participate are not working in football participation. So you see what this is? It's pretty much you read out what is on there, you kind of write about what's on that thing, you just put the fact down, and then you might give some examples of why this happens. So, for example, football, lack of facilities due to kind of selling of playing fields, poor weather, less money available from the government, and things like this. So, top of that, next fact, more people 65 plus than ever before. Therefore, if this is a big growth area, strategy should be directed even more at this age because you're getting more people involved. So I've looked at this to see, right, basically I've just given you this because sometimes you're not going to get something directly from here. It's just going to give you some data that you have to do a little kind of summary of, and I'll give you another example of that tomorrow when we're looking at transport, so you can have a look at it. So because it's 21st century Britain, they will give you some statistics. You might have to just apply your knowledge and just summarise what has been said. Ultimately, you're saying, is the participation high? Yes or no? What's the fact? And then can you give a reason why that fact might be happening, and what can be done in the future? Let's have a look at the actual social and cultural factors then. So starting off then, we start off with class. So we know in the society we have at the moment, we have a 3-class society, but there are less obvious class divides. And the key thing now is that sport can really, really act as this vehicle for upward social mobility. So what you have now is people can go, to use this term, from rags to riches. So you've got kind of very much lower working class people who are using sport as a vehicle to go to riches, to earn lots of money, to gain this upward social mobility. So if I put that onto here, so you've got here, upper class still play rich sports, polo. That's a nice new example. We've gone from hunting and now we're looking at polo. Middle class are still playing kind of golf, for example. Lower class are still always going to play football. That is the kind of things that you're always going to get in there. However, what we could do now is just put an example of how sport can be used for working class or lower class people, e.g. football, to go from rags to riches. Or gain upward social mobility. Okay, going down from there then, amateur. Now, amateur now in 21st century Britain is not dictated by class. Okay, so what you're saying now is if you play at amateur, it means you're playing, if I just put you on today, just put an example, e.g. playing a sport for fun. It could be any sport, but it's not done for payment. That's all it is, but it doesn't mean you're an upper and middle class performer doing it. That's not what's dictated anymore. Professional then. Now, due to National Lottery funding, this has increased the number of professionals that we have in Britain in elite level British sport. Okay, so now you have kind of people like, and I'll put some examples here, Jessica Ennis, Mo Farah, both getting funding from the National Lottery, enabling them to be full-time athletes. I thought they'd be two recognisable names. And going down from there, law and order. So law and order, okay, so as I said before, ethics. So a lack of ethics in sport due to things like drugs, hooliganism and match fixing. Okay, so sport now has got even more so than 1960s going up to 2000. Now we're looking at a time where doping in sport is at its highest, it's rife. You have hooliganism, not to the same extent, to be fair, than it was in the 1980s, no way, but also now you have the introduction of things like match fixing. On top of this, and I think this bit here, I would say this is not as prevalent, apart from drugs, these two are not as prevalent maybe as kind of the things down here. Law and order has gone through the roof in British society and indeed sport. Legal claims for things like contact sports. So you're looking at things like kind of rugby, for example, referees being sued for kind of concussion due to poor technique in the scrum. They are now liable for this kind of stuff. Safety of spectators, bound by law. So now following the Hillsborough disaster, they had something called the Taylor Report that made the stadium had to be all-seater. So I've put some examples onto here how you apply it. So what has happened, so if I start with this bit here, law and order, due to the widespread problem of doping in sport, that this has led them to the following. Now, what happens is that now, due to law, there are lots of appeals to something called the Court for Arbitration in Sport. And what this is, it's an organisation whereby if somebody gets banned for doping, okay, they can then appeal to this Court of Arbitration for Sport, and they can then overturn it. So this is the kind of society we're in at the moment. You can get caught, and I think, we had a British athlete called Dwayne Chambers before London 2012, and basically he was banned for doping for life by the British Olympic Association, but he appealed to the Court for Arbitration in Sport and then was allowed to start again. So what you have then now is this concept of appealing to the Court for Arbitration of Sport, showing how law and order is massively commonplace in kind of modern British sport. On top of that, concussion laws. I said it into there. So concussion laws in rugby football, referees sued for this kind of stuff. So what you're looking for now is kind of making sure that you can kind of have a good understanding of that. So okay, so you've got this concept of like referees being sued, and there's one I didn't have space to fit on here. But you also have situations with actual football clubs. So, for example, Jose Mourinho was sued by the physiotherapist at Chelsea Football Club, Eva Canero, for sexual discrimination. So basically saying that she was sexually discriminated against in her job role. So there's an example of how you can get this kind of law and order or litigation taking place, both concussion towards referees. On top of that, you could get employers being sued by employees, such as the Jose Mourinho case there. All-seater football stadia following the Hillsborough disaster. If you want to put that in, then you've got the you can put that in the Taylor Report. Was the thing that led to that. And going on from there, then education literacy. Now, what you have, okay, with regard to sport, you've had a massive growth in academic qualifications. For example, sports science degrees. For example, on top of that, you have sports science degrees. On top of that, you've got PhDs. You've got a master's in sports science. This has then led to, and I think you can put this in as top before I even put that on. This has led to kind of an increase in the kind of amount of careers linked to sport. For example, physiotherapists. For example, sports therapists. For example, performance analysts. So these could be examples of how that works. On top of that, education literacy. Considering the amount of state schools there are compared to public schools, there are still, due to that proportion, there's still a high number of public school educated students who are competing and winning medals. This is in the Rio 2016 Olympics. So if I just put it onto there, you could start to talk about the growth of academic qualifications, give some examples of that, which leads to more careers available. On top of that, a third of Olympic medal athletes in Rio are public school educated, showing that, you know, the proportion is still high compared to the amount of public school students there are compared to state school students. If we go on then, gender. Now, what has happened is we've had a massive increase in kind of gender equality, and certainly in terms of kind of female participation, in terms of TV presenters, sports TV presenters who are female. So I'll put some example on here. How do we apply this? There are still higher numbers of males participating in sport than females. That's your first point. However, there have been a massive increase in female participation rates in what were traditionally male sports, such as football and rugby. There's an example here of kind of a number of female presenters. There are now 481 when the kind of textbook came out of female presenters anchoring sports shows or taking part or presenting sports shows. But we have a flip side to this. You have to just get into your head. Is this a case of kind of equality, or is there a case that, you know, out of all of those, I think there's a number that's 25 of those out of 481 are aged 50 and over. So what you're tending to say there is that, yeah, you've got more female presenters, but only the ones who might be considered attractive to the opposite sex, or the same sex, depending on what floats your boat. So if we go through from there, next one, income. So what we've got there, disposable income is always going to dictate participation. So what we've got two ways of looking at it now. We've got more money than as a working class population than we've had ever before. Okay, however, there was a period, this kind of the recession, that had a negative impact on participation. So salaries have increased, more disposable income to take part in sport. However, you can turn this round by saying the recession led to a decrease in participation in sport. Time, this is a real tough one, because, you know, we are supposed to work 40 hours, but what's happening now, of course, is that people tend to work a lot more than 40 hours. So people will say there are problems with work-life balance, money rich, time poor, which will dictate how your activities take place. Now, I think on this, what you've got to just be aware of, you'll probably get something in terms of some interpretation of some information on a graph, saying how much time people have, and then to just apply your knowledge to it. Final one then, transport. So what we've got then, travel is quicker. So we've now got, kind of say, for example, going abroad, for example. Now people can travel abroad. For example, you might want to have been at a school team. So now you've got a massive kind of impact of you can have global travel for things like sports tours onto here. So I'll put international travel via airplane to take part and watch sports. And the key change now, of course, is that, you know, cheap flights have led to international travel for both performers and for sports players. We have now every kind of almost weekly, you have European leagues such as Champions League or Europa League in football. On top of that, you have it not only is travel quicker for the elite level, you also have things, travel is accessible for kind of sports tours. Top of this, locally, we're talking about there's an increase in car ownership. This can have a positive or negative effect, because you're thinking, well, if you've got increased car ownership, it allows you more opportunity to go to the gym, to join a sports club. However, the flip side to that is that people might be more inclined to spend time in the car, travelling places, when they could actually do something active in terms of walking to it. Not easy, this whole section, but what I would ask you to do is just to make sure, can you look at these characteristics, you could plug it, and can you then give it a bit of context and then try and apply some examples. So yeah, I've kind of got a couple of questions you can have a look at that are going to ask you to interpret some information, some statements or some data. Your job is then just to make sure that you have a good understanding of these kind of how they've slightly changed between the end of the 20th century and the early parts of the 21st century that we are now in 2018. Okay, so I'll leave that there. Make sure you get decent notes on this, and we'll have a look at some questions tomorrow. Thank you.